So thanks. Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaskaram, everyone. My name is Ganesan Sri Ram, and I welcome you all to another exciting session of the Jnana Sudha. Before we introduce today's speaker, I have a few housekeeping rules. This program is both on Zoom and YouTube. Please switch off your audio and video if you are on Zoom. You can post your questions on the chat line if you are on YouTube, and they will be picked up by one of our volunteers and post it to today's speaker. For more info, please visit our website at www.svbfcanada.com. And lastly, if there are any technical difficulties, please bear with us. Now, for the program will be as follows. My talk will be followed by an intro video of the Jnana Sudha. And then today's speaker will be introduced by our trustee of SVBF Canada, Dr. Parmeshwar Bhatt. And then today's speaker will give the talk for about 45 minutes. And then at the end of this session, there will be a question answer session as well. If there are any questions, post on the YouTube chat line, and this will be posted by our volunteer Sri Ravi Shankar, and then it will be followed by the vote of thanks by Dr. Lakshmanan of SVBF Canada. So without further ado, please let us continue for the introduction video. Thank you.
Gam Ganapathy Namaha. Om Shri Saraswati Sada Shiva Samarambha Shankaracharya Madhyama Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Parampara. Shruti Smriti Puranana Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram. Namaste Sharade Devi Sringeri Puravasini Tvamaham Prarthaye Nityam Vidyam Buddhim Cha Dehi Me. Devi Sharade Jnanaprade Jnaneshwari Jnanavahini Jnanakosham Samudghataya ज्ञानसुधा सदा वर्षय अन्तर्ज्योतिर्बहिर्ज्योतिः प्रत्यज्योतिः परात्परः ज्योतिर्ज्योतिर्स्वयं ज्योतिः आत्मज्योतिः शिवोऽस्म्यहम् हरिः ओम् तत्सत् Namaste. Our Sanatana Dharma, the way of leading life, is a finely tuned web of culture, customs and traditions, fine arts, literature and science. Sanatana Dharma is Jnana Kosha, the rich treasury of knowledge. Our Guru Parampara, starting from Sadashiva all the way down to the present Guru, is a sturdy boat of knowledge, Jnana Nauka. It is sailing on the river of knowledge, Jnana Vahini. This Jnana Nauka is carrying all the Gurus, Rishis, Munis, and Darshanikas, who are all holding Jnana Kosha with utmost care and love. This boat is driven and guided by none other than Jnaneshwari Sharadamba, who is magnetically attracting all individuals by sprinkling Jnana Sudha, the nectar of knowledge, all through the way. Jnana is immortal, Amrita. It is sweet and nourishing like Sudha, milk. This Jnana Sudha is very essential to every individual to realize the supreme truth, Brahma Satya. With the blessings of Devi Sharadamba and our Sringeri Sri Jagat Gurus, SVBF Canada is having the vision of conducting Jnana Sudha as an ongoing satsanga with scholars, revered Swamijis of various ashramas, artists of various fine arts, sharing their knowledge through talks, lectures, demonstrations, workshops, and artistic presentations as well. Let us all take part in sipping this Jnana Sudha to become a real good human being, as well as to grow as divine being.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Om Shri Sharda Parameshwariyai Namaha. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Sringeri Vidya Bharati Foundation, Canada, it is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker of today, Professor Hema Ganapathy, and all of you audience on YouTube and Zoom. It is a kind of a snowy day here in Toronto, but I am glad you found the time to join us, at least online. Now, as the video said, this Jnana Sudha is a series of lectures we have been organizing on various aspects of Sanatana Dharma with the distinguished speakers from all over the world. we had many Swamijis, learned professors, and other speakers come and talk to us on different aspects of Sanatana Dharma, which we have benefited a great deal. And today we have one more session in this series by another distinguished speaker, Professor Hema Ganapathy Coleman, right here from Toronto. And just a couple of words about Professor Hema Ganapathy. She is a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And before that, she was an associate professor of developmental psychology at Indiana State University in the US. And she was a visiting scholar first at Ontario Institute of Studies in Education here in Toronto, and then also at the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda. Today she is going to talk to us about a very interesting topic, and I find this topic to be, I hope it will be very, very useful for parents and grandparents with the children growing up in this multicultural society here in Canada. As I said, Professor Ganapathy is a cultural psychologist. Her research examines the cultural beliefs about parenting, children, and childhood of Indian, particularly Hindu parents, both immigrants in the US and Canada, and the parents living in the state of Gujarat in India. She has been interested in the strategies that parents use to socialize their children into their particular ideas of good child, as they live a life of the intersection of often conflicting cultures. Of special concern to her are the everyday routines and recurrent tactics that parents use to teach their children the ideals and principles that they value. Her work has been published in a variety of scholarly venues, and it is our great pleasure to welcome Professor Hema Ganapathy to talk to us on psychology and the Sanatana Dharma. Professor Ganapathy, please take over.
Gajananam Bhutaganadi Sevitam Kabitajambu Phalasarabhakshitam Umasutam Shoka Vinashakaranam Namami Vigneshwara Padapankajam Namami Vigneshwara Padapankajam. Thank you for this introduction. And I would like to start by expressing my gratitude for Sringeri Vidya Bharati Foundation Toronto's invitation to this talk. It's a great honor for me. I use terms like Indian and Hindu in this talk, but I'm profoundly conscious that India is a diverse nation state and that there are many ways to be Indian and to be Hindu. In this presentation, I'll use the terms Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, and Hindu Dharma interchangeably. During the first half of my presentation, I will talk about my research and reflect on some of the findings from my research. And out of those specific examples that come from my research, I will then continue in the second half of the presentation to reflect on some of the larger questions around psychology and Sanatana Dharma. In order to really know who we are, we have to recognize what is valuable for us, what is worth doing or having, and what we should oppose and what we should reject. And what we consider to be important or valuable depends on our ideals and our principles and how close we are to those ideals. There's a very strong moral and ethical aspect to our knowledge and understanding of ourselves. We initially learn the moral and spiritual language of good, bad, worthwhile, and worthless from those who are responsible for raising us. For over 20 years, using interviews and many other methods, observations, interviews that are both individual interviews and group interviews, diaries that the parents use to talk about the daily routines of their children and to describe what meaning they attach to the routines that they arrange for their children. So using a variety of different methods, my cultural and psychological research has focused on what the ideas of the good are and how immigrant Indian Hindu parents in the United States transmit them to their children. So after moving to the United States nearly a quarter of a century ago for my doctorate, I began to study immigrant Indian Hindus in the city of Baltimore in Maryland. Later, as a faculty member in Terre Haute, Indiana, I continued the study and I combined it with research in the city of Baroda in Gujarat in India. My choice of topic was guided by my interest in the psychology of parents and in the psychology of parenting, and especially how parenting is undertaken by those who have immigrated. As many of you who are in the audience can attest, coming from one cultural and religious background and moving to another cultural and religious background, a place with a completely different cultural and religious background, is difficult. And it becomes even more challenging when you have to bring up children in a completely new environment. The main question that I was asking in my research was, what goals or values do parents want to inculcate in their children? When the parents in my study discussed with me the values that they wanted to instill in their children, they frequently mentioned 4 different themes, and they were: be independent, family closeness, cultural and religious goals, including have good morals and values, and understand themselves. So with regard to the first value that these immigrant Indian Hindu parents discussed with me, they frequently mentioned independence, right? But within my study, there were also European Americans, so white American parents. And those parents also mentioned that independence was extremely important for them as a goal or a value that they wanted to inculcate in their children. But the European American parents talked in terms of independence as individuality, self-actualization, the freedom or the individual autonomy to do one's desire and will. But the Indian Hindu parents in my study did not define independence as individuality, as self-actualization, or as individual autonomy to do one's desire or will. So the dictionary definition of the term independent is not subject to control by others, self-governing, not affiliated with a larger controlling unit. The term is often used in many parts of the Western world, along with ideas like individuality, individual autonomy, and self-actualization. But by contrast, the parents, the immigrant Indian Hindu parents in my study, tended to define independence using various combinations of 4 interrelated themes. And those themes were adherence to a daily routine, discipline, responsibility, and obedience. And although it might be tempting to discuss these 4 sub-themes separately in order to preserve the integrity of how these parents explained their thoughts, I keep these 4 sub-themes together. Now, there was a mother called Nita who advanced independence as a crucial socialization goal for her children, and this is how she explained it. Independence means you have to have certain self-discipline. You have to do all those daily things. So I do tell him, this is what you have to do during that time period. So he, her son, plans it himself. There are certain parameters given to them to work within. My goal in my day-to-day is I have to keep my things in a certain place, knowing what to do, how to do it. That is very important, and helping them to recognize those things. It may start off as telling them, do it in a certain order, and then it becomes part of what is important to them. He's doing most of it himself. We just have to say, are you done? Are you ready? Just like a reminder. So here Nita, a mother, speaks about how she supports the development of this value of independence in her son, which she values as a personal quality associated with a sense of responsibility. For her, independence equals unprompted observance of a daily routine. In addition to references to the daily routine, the parents also frequently used the word discipline in discussing the concept of independence. For example, this mother, Nita, she said, you have to have certain self-discipline. Another mother, who I call Pallavi, clarified, independence is that discipline. They go to school, then they are back. I am here. We are doing that together very routinely. Food, bag pack up for school, then plan what next. Start the homework. They have to study first. They cannot be busy playing. They have to be responsible. Now, this mother locates independence within disciplined adherence to a daily routine, just like the other mother, Nita. Another mother, Hetal, explains independence means discipline, and then she described it in this way. Every day they pray in the morning as soon as they wake up, use the bathroom and brush and take a shower. Then they go to the temple. In the basement, we have the temple. So every day, 10 minutes, both kids sit and pray. Then we take dinner in the evening. We do the family prayer, and then we start the dinner. Notice in this quote, her special emphasis on the specific sequence of activities that she wants her children to follow in the morning. Then here's something else that she says. Discipline is when they come from school. If they want to eat, they can eat in the kitchen, not in the living room. They cannot go out before I come home. When they go out, they cannot touch anybody's things. And in especially discipline, both kids have to give respect to elder people. So like Nita, this mother Hetal also defines independence as following a prescribed routine and a set of rules, but she also very strongly emphasizes the need to do things at the right time, in the right place, and in the right way. In addition, several of the parents also spoke about the importance of eating the right food. I also noted the use of oil for hair and body by several of the parents. Now, on this slide, I've highlighted some of the words like can and not, and cannot, have to, mainly because they're very much like instructions, right? They're like rules that are being read out to the children. So again, returning to this, the parents were very, very concerned about their children doing the right things at the right time and in the right place and the right way. And many of the parents also talked about things like eating the right foods. Now, the idea of Dinacharya is central to the language of Ayurveda. Dinacharya, Dina meaning day plus Acharya, to follow, is the Ayurvedic prescription for a balanced daily regimen that is meant to lead to health and happiness and a balanced life. Dinacharya invites the individual to not take time for granted and to work in step with time in order to be present and to recognize the gift of life and the gift of this human body. Although none of the parents in my research used the term Dinacharya, and although in very strict terms, Dinacharya includes many more activities than what these parents listed, the strong emphasis that all of these parents placed on the importance of a daily routine sounded very much like the concept of Dinacharya. Parental instructions, such as the ones that the parents in my study gave, also communicate the expectation to the child that the child will obey out of respect for the parents and out of a sense of obligation towards the family. Such explanations of discipline expressed as can do, cannot do, have to do, they are commands that stress the importance of fulfilling socially obligated duties, and they inform the child that their personal autonomy, their personal will or desire is not as important as their location within a network, within a community, and it's not as important as their obligation towards the family. Now, in this quotation, the mother Pallavi also brings the attribute of responsibility. She says they have to be responsible into her definition of independence. However, as that other mother, Hetal, when she speaks about not touching other people's belongings, she begins to insert other qualities such as integrity through self-control, respect for what belongs to others into her conceptualization, into her definition of independence as discipline. Then, by bringing in the notion of respect for elders, she emphasizes the idea of age-based authority and the importance of parental obedience. Age-based authority is a very important organizing principle of Indian society. Age places the adult naturally above the child in terms of not only physical maturity, but also in terms of knowledge and experience. All this means that in the personalized understanding that Hetal has for the concept of independence, discipline is interlocked, it is combined with many other related values, such as self-control, personal integrity, and respect for people who are older than the child. And all of these different qualities come together to enable the child to do the right thing at the right time and in the right way. Finally, in the view of these parents, children learn independence when they learn to obey the rules that the parents set and enforce at home. So for these parents, the term independence was understood quite differently. They talked of it as a combination of an adherence to a daily routine, discipline, obedience, and responsibility. Now, what these parents said that they believed in and did in child rearing was also very much visible in their practice. When I was interviewing them, they would often interrupt the interviews to issue instructions to their children or to check that their child was on track with the various routines and activities that the parents had put in place for them. As I said earlier, in contrast to these immigrant Indian Hindu parents, when European American parents, who were also part of my research, spoke about independence, they did not talk about the ability to follow a daily routine. They did not talk about responsibility. They did not talk about obedience or discipline. Instead, they spoke about being secure, being comfortable with oneself, realizing one's full potential, And they also talked of personal autonomy or independence in thought and action. So very contrasting views of this idea of independence. How do these Indian American Hindu parents inculcate independence in their children? For these parents, the inculcation of independence in the child, very paradoxically, requires that they maintain a very high degree of control over their child's day-to-day life, at least initially. They provide structure by establishing a clear daily routine that they support in the beginning through very explicit, very direct instructions. This is what you have to do, and this is how you have to do it, type of things. Telling the child exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, eliminates confusion, and it leaves very little to chance. Later, these parents continue to reinforce adherence to the daily routine and the rules of discipline, responsibility, and obedience by means of more indirect verbal reminder. So things like, are you done? How should you greet an Indian auntie? Things like that. And supervising, often from the edges. According to this mother Pallavi, a child who is on the verge of achieving the goal of becoming independent requires only minimal support. The mere presence of an adult nearby is sufficient. Ultimately, it becomes completely self-governed by the child, and once this happens, it might be said that the goal of independence has been attained. So to sum up this section on independence, although the parents in this study used the English phrase, be independent, to convey a goal that they value for their children, when they explained the term be independent, they talked about it in ways that did not match with either the dictionary definition of the word or the word or the way the word was used and understood by European American parents. These parents defined independence in terms of discipline, responsibility, as seen in the ability to obediently follow one's daily routine without being reminded, which is socially obligated. They socialized their child, or they inculcated this value in their child predominantly by creating a routine for the child that they then supported first through direct strategies such as explicit instructions, and then later through more indirect approaches like reminders. Now, similarly, these parents also used the term family closeness, which they offered as another goal that they wanted their children to achieve. And they defined the term family closeness also in a very, very particular way. Now, the European American parents in my study also said that family closeness was an important goal that they wanted their child to achieve. But when I asked them what they meant by family closeness, they said that the family was a refuge. The family is a source of emotional security. But the Indian Hindu parents in my study did not define family closeness in terms of family as refuge or in terms of family as a source of emotional security. Instead, they talked about family closeness in terms of spending time with the family and listening to one another, or mutual regard. So for these parents, for the immigrant Indian Hindu parents in my study, family closeness was built on a foundation of respect for parental authority, compliance or obedience, mutual regard, and the idea that the parents are role models. In addition to emphasizing independence and family closeness, the parents in this research underlined how important it was for their children to learn about their cultural origins and about Hindu Dharma. In the cultural and religious goals of these Indian parents, the belief in the greatness of ancient Indian Hindu civilization was always in the front and center. They used several routines and practices to instill cultural and religious values, such as speaking the mother tongue at home, playing Indian classical music at home, enrolling their children in classical Indian music and dance classes, taking them to the temple every week, placing them in Bal Vihar classes, cooking Indian food at home, teaching them Sanskrit shlokas. So one of the mothers, for example, she said that a rule in her house is that when the children wake up, they have to look at their hand and recite, Karagre vasate Lakshmi, Karamadhye Saraswati, Karamule sthita Govinda Prabhate Karadarshana. So, she was very, very clear that this was part of the daily routine of their children. In addition, the parents in my study disapproved of and rejected many elements of Western society for their children. This included the preoccupation that they perceived with what they saw as selfish individualism in the West, the apparent greed and material wastefulness of life in the West, the lack of family unity that they inferred from the high divorce rates and low parental involvement. And they also disapproved of Western children's apparent disrespect of their parents. As I analyzed the particular combination of goals that these parents listed, so independence as disciplined, responsible, and obedient adherence to a routine, respect for parental authority, and these Indian cultural and Hindu religious goals, and all the different routines and practices and procedures that these parents were using to inculcate these values in their children, I began to realize that the parents had been making unspoken references to the traditional concept of a sanskari child all along. So in a study that was done with nearly 100 parents in Gujarat many years ago, the participants listed being sanskari as one of the most important characteristics of a good child. Being sanskari involved social values such as being respectful and obedient towards the parents and other elders, being family-oriented, and it also included a series of personal moral values such as being truthful, humble, religious, trustworthy, modest, sincere, and kind. Now, so these were all the different qualities that parents listed in that study that was done with 100 middle-class Gujarati parents. Now, the term sanskar is very difficult to define because it has many meanings. The word is derived from the Sanskrit root to do or make with the integrative prefix sama and implies the activity which creates, forms, adapts, and makes perfect. Now, there are two ways to understand the term samskara, and there's a third way, and I'll come to that in a moment. One, samskaras as rites of passage or as rituals. Two, samskaras as psychological or behavioral traits and characteristics. And the third, which is samskriti or sanskriti. Let us look at the first meaning of samskara. Samskaras are rituals that are used to create qualities. It comes from the Sanskrit word samskara, which refers to the Hindu life cycle rituals or the sacraments. So things like the namakarana or the wedding ceremony, those sorts of things that symbolically transform an individual from a biological to a cultural and to a social and integrated being. Rites of passage, rituals, other actions, studies, diligent preparation, and inner resolutions. All these trigger impressions or dispositions in the psyche of an individual, and these influence how the individual acts, perceives the self, and the manner in which the individual responds to or accepts the karmic circumstances and the future. These rituals, these samskaras, are used throughout the lifespan to create and to perfect. Samskara rites are performed on either things or on people, and in all cases, the idea is for the rite to make the thing or the being fit, so yogya, for its purposes. Fitness is of two kinds. One, that which arises by the removal of taints or doshas, and two, that which arises through the generation of fresh inner qualities. So these rituals are not just rites of passage. They do not just signal a transition from one stage to another in the life cycle. Rather, they're also rituals of healing, and they're also rituals of construction that create new qualities that can actually bring latent tendencies out and that perfectly integrate a person into a complete whole. When you look at the meaning of samskaras as psychological or behavioral traits or characteristics, in the context of karma theory, samskaras are dispositions, they are character or behavioral traits that exist from birth, from previous lives in some schools of Hindu philosophy, or that are prepared and perfected by a person over one's lifetime through practices such as meditation or yoga, through conscious shaping of the inner self, one's desire, through a sense of moral responsibility, and through sustained and systematic practice. Samskaras exist as imprints on the subconscious according to various schools of Hindu philosophy. These perfected or these default imprints of karma within a person influence that person's nature, response, and states of mind. In some schools of Hindu philosophy, the psychological concept of samskara is also known as vasana. It is also related to the word samskara is also related to the word Sanskriti, signifying cultural heritage. Used widely, particularly in northern and in western India, sanskar, the word, carries the meaning cultured and upbringing within it. It is also considered to be synonymous with ethics, which are typically viewed as learned or as received from parents and other elders in one's family through direct teaching, role setting, and role modeling. In my study, in my research, several of the parents talked at length about their worry that their children would imbibe the bad values that are circulating in Western society. In a later conversation, one of the mothers, Naina, specifically used the term sanskar as she spoke about the qualities that she wanted her sons to develop. Another mother explicitly used the word sanskar right from the beginning, as did a father who said very clearly that he did not want his children to play with the children in the neighborhood. When I asked why, he said, because they do not have good sanskar. So many of these parents said that teaching sanskar to children is important. But some of the mothers and fathers were very clear that they wanted their children to have friends who had sanskar. And they said that being sanskari is a very important goal that they want to help their children to attain. When asked what sanskari meant, one of the mothers said, always telling the truth, not harming anyone, not thinking badly for anyone, being helpful, and being respectful of elders. Emphasizing the learning of sanskar as an important socialization goal in her scheme, one of the mothers, Pallavi her name was, she simply remarked, being sanskari is to have values. It's not uncommon for an individual who's badly behaved, who's ill-mannered and disrespectful towards elders, who's immodest, or who does not have a good understanding of right and wrong, to be labeled as lacking in sanskar. Equally, a person who is courteous, who's well-mannered, obedient, and respectful towards elders, who is knowledgeable about cultural norms and religion, who is modest, sincere, truthful, and who generally operates according to a high ethical and moral standard, that person is said to have excellent sanskars or is said to be sanskari. As a word in the domain of values, thus, the word sanskar fuses a very wide range of social, personal, cultural, and moral qualities into a single concept. There is absolutely no doubt. So here, this is the way that these parents conceptualized sanskar. There's absolutely no doubt that the experience of immigration changes at least some aspects of the cultural ideas that these parents may have held from being followers of Hindu Dharma. Most of the parents in my study were sufficiently fluent in English to know the generally accepted meanings of the English words that they used. But as they tried to convey the essence of a concept that has deep roots in the ancient philosophical systems that make up Hindu Dharma, these parents used English in very creative ways. They used a variety of different words and concepts and brought them all together to express this very complex notion of sanskar. Then they used speech, role modeling, and daily routines to bring up their children to be sanskari. They enforced all these routines, including prayer, a schedule of study and learning, visits to the temple, and so on. The regularity of these activities signaled to their children both the centrality, the importance culturally of these activities, and the importance of the values that these activities embody, right? In participating in these routines, children learned at the ground level the what's and the how's of the activities themselves, while also imbibing the values that were contained in them. If we were to take the meaning of sanskar as a set of qualities, we could say that these parents were inculcating those qualities in their children. If we take the meaning of sanskar as a set of rituals to create and perfect, we could say that these parents were using the daily routine, activities, prayers, temple visits, etc., much like rituals that would create and perfect their children's qualities. If these parents were artists, their children were their creations, their children were their works of art. A single word like sanskar is significant because it demonstrates how one single word can hold within it many valued social and cultural dispositions that the family can use to socialize their children, to inculcate in their children. An individual who has been trained into such culturally specific ways of being and thinking becomes a member of that social and cultural group and becomes able to fully participate in it both now and in the future. And this is exactly what the parents in my research were aspiring for. One could argue that the immigrant Indian Hindu parents in my study belonged to the top 3 tiers of the Hindu caste hierarchy. And that is the reason that they were so familiar with some of these concepts. But in my study of the opinions of impoverished, mostly Dalit parents in India on the topic of education, I found that those parents spoke with great respect about their teachers, and they often referred to them as guru. They characterized their young student selves as playful and distracted shishyas. They upheld the sanctity of the teacher-student relationship, even as they occasionally criticized the schools and the teachers of their childhood. And bear in mind that these were parents who had gone to school only for very few years. For them, the term guru is a shared religious and cultural concept that they use as a resource for understanding their own educational experiences and for remembering their childhood selves later on in their lives. The existence of so many religious traditions in India and the region's extraordinarily long civilization and history mean that a wide range of concepts have diffused through large sections of the population, and these have been internalized by people, and then they appear and reappear in their ways of thinking and behaving. What I'm saying is that the imprint of the cultural and religious frameworks that we grow up with, whether those frameworks are experienced directly or indirectly, their imprint on our thought is persistent. It's very, very deep and it's very long-term, and it often defies differences in income level and nationality. What we accept widely as psychology today started as a branch of Western philosophy. It has been traced especially to Greek thought. It developed into a separate research-based field of study in the late 1800s in Germany. When it began, psychology was an experimental science, although some psychologists did use the study of individual cases and did conduct research within societies and communities to build their understanding. Due to the emphasis on experimentation in psychology, laboratories were opened in various universities like Harvard and Stanford, Pennsylvania, Johns Hopkins, etc. Topics like attention, perception, motivation, and learning were studied using tightly controlled experiments in lab settings. And the results from the research conducted in these universities were published in a very select group of scholarly journals in North America and in Europe. The psychology that we teach and learn in many universities in India and in other parts of the world reflects the foundations of this Western scientific psychology. Within Western scientific psychology, most of the important concepts and theories are in English. So nouns like friendship, life, self-respect, happiness, inner harmony, equality, and freedom are used. Adjectives such as cheerful, ambition, love, etc. are also used. Concepts like introversion, extroversion, conscientiousness are also used. Now, these are English words that cannot all be simply translated literally into other languages without losing some of their meaning. And words like these do not include words used in other cultural and other linguistic groups. I offered sanskar as one example of an untranslatable word that has a very, very deep meaning. As scholars like Anand Paranjape and Dharm Bhavuk tell us, much like the history of psychology in the West, the history of psychology in India stretches back to ancient times. In Indian Hindu thought, psychology has always been studied as a part of metaphysics. So one cannot find a single traditional work devoted to psychological processes, although psychological concepts have clearly been parts of religious, spiritual, artistic, and philosophical inquiry in India since the Upanishads were composed sometime between 1500 and 1600 BCE. Some of these Upanishads became highly influential, and because of this, there is a very long intellectual tradition within which the Upanishadic and pre-Upanishadic ideas were analyzed and interpreted. Following its independence in 1947 from British rule, psychology in India moved away from its indigenous philosophical roots and adopted Western method and theory. The study of psychological processes in India and in other parts of the world involved the use of Western terms and concepts. When psychologists came across non-Western concepts and terms, they considered those terms to be foreign and somehow abnormal. Due to the pressure to use Western psychological concepts and methods, few scholars attempted to derive psychological principles from their own philosophical or folk traditions. But research within fields like cross-cultural psychology and within cultural psychology has brought about some important changes in the field so that there are scholars within psychology. We call them indigenous psychologists. Some of them are Indian psychologists who are trying to develop an Indian psychology. And these people are interested in studying concepts that come from old cultures or from ancient religious traditions. Let me give you one example here and discuss it. The concept of the self, what's called self-concept in psychology. The answer to the question, who am I, is important because it tells us how we view and understand ourselves, and it also influences how we interact with the social world. The words that we use to describe ourselves tell much about the influence of our cultural background. If I say, or if you say that I'm hardworking, it might at first seem as if there's nothing so special about it. After all, there are hardworking people in all cultures in the world. But a statement like I am hardworking reflects a very particular understanding of oneself. If you say that you are hardworking, you are thinking of yourself in terms of having some lasting traits that stay constant across situations. If you contrast that term, I am hardworking, with the statement, I am a mother, or I am a wife, I am a daughter, I am a sister, you could still say that there are many mothers and wives and sisters and daughters worldwide. But when you use that as your primary description of yourself, it shows that there is someone else in your self-description or self-concept, as it is called in psychology. Such a statement highlights an experience of oneself, an understanding of oneself that is connected with others, and that gives importance to your roles in society. In general, Indians of all types are more likely than, say, white Americans to describe themselves in terms of their roles and relationships. They consider themselves to be what is called interdependent. When people are interdependent, they view themselves as being connected to others. They think of themselves as participants in larger social units, and so they are more likely to think about how their behavior will affect others. So they'll be much more concerned about group harmony, for example. So for instance, for a person from India, deciding whether or not to miss a friend's wedding party or dinner party is not just a personal decision. More than a personal decision, it's a social and a moral decision. Of course, people all over the world think of themselves in terms of both lasting traits as well as roles and relationships, but the degree to which they define themselves in terms of one or the other is quite different across cultures. Research on self-concept and personality in the United States shows that for Americans, consistency across situations is extremely important. So the traits should remain consistent across situations. So if an American defines himself or themselves as truthful, they work on being truthful across situations and are very uncomfortable when they are not being truthful. Here I draw on the work of the brilliant folklorist A.K. Ramanujan. And he says, I quote him here, cultures may be said to have overall tendencies to idealize and think in terms of the context-free or the context-sensitive kind of rules. In cultures like India's, the context-sensitive kind of rule is the preferred formulation. And then he reminds us that every Indian Hindu text comes with a context. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata tell us exactly under what context they were composed, by whom, why, what are the benefits you will derive from reading these texts, and so on. For every single story in India, the place, the time, the people, the background, all of these are specified. Hence, among Indians, whether the truth should be told in a situation really depends on that context, on that situation. Being sensitive to the context is extremely important in India and for people from India. Now, in Indian Hindu worldviews, people are assigned roles that depend on the stage in life that they are in, and their behavior has to match the stage in life that they are in. So you have this conceptualization of the Hindu life cycle, Ashrama Dharma. It offers an excellent avenue to discuss the culturally specific and the context-sensitive manner of conceptualizing values in the Indian Hindu context. Ashrama Dharma tells us what conduct is right for one's stage of life, and it provides us with the values and goals to be pursued during particular stages. So human life in this is divided into sequential stages. Each stage has its particular social and personal environment. Each stage has its own ethical guidelines, duties, and responsibilities. Each stage emphasizes different values or goals in life. The goal of each period is the fulfillment and the development of the individual. This system is part of the complex dharma system within Hinduism. Its principal aim is to inculcate living that is centered on the divine. Its purpose is to encourage people to uphold dharma as they pursue the chief aims of human life, namely dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, the purusharthas, in the course of their journey upon earth, without neglecting their obligatory duties and without sacrificing their spiritual ideals and their human values. So in this conceptualization, the first stage is brahmacharya or student life, characterized by discipline or celibacy. Grihastha, family life. It includes making a living, having children, and bringing them up. This stage was considered the most important because the individual lives a virtuous life at this time and is also doing the work that is needed to sustain people who are in other stages in their life cycle. The Grihastha stage is an intense stage marked by many attachments, more attachments than at any other stage in the life cycle. one finds meaning in life by pursuing the Purusharthas. So in this stage of life, money and pleasure were allowed, though in moderation, and they were to be guided by dharma or duty. This stage of life was clearly a preparation for the next stage, rather than a stage of uncontrolled excesses of do whatever you like. Dharma was always supposed to guide one's behavior, and one was never to lose sight of the fact that the ultimate goal is spiritual liberation or moksha. The next stage was Vanaprastha, preparation to leave material life by conscious broadening of perspective through travel and pilgrimage. The person handed over their household responsibilities to the next generation at this stage. They took an advisory role and gradually withdrew from the world. Vanaprastha was a transition phase from a householder's life with its greater emphasis on wealth, security, pleasure, and sexual pursuits to one with a greater emphasis on moksha. And the last stage was sannyasa, final renunciation of material life and desires, and the giving up of prejudice for the exclusive pursuit of a simple life and for the pursuit of spirituality and wisdom. In folk versions of ashrama dharma, there's another stage, balya, with numerous sub-stages that can be found. And during the stage of balya, the child's conduct is playful, carefree. The child is not bound by any rules, and the child is indulged profoundly by everyone around them. Added to this, to the ashrama dharma, is the concept of swadharma, or the conduct that is right for one's station, jati or class, or swabhava or nature. And there is further specificity based on the person's gender. The entry into each stage in this model and substage is announced by a rite of passage or a sacrament that is known as a samskara. The stages were set up originally to apply to only the members of the top 3 tiers of the caste hierarchy. Other castes adapted the stages to meet their needs. Congruent with a mostly patriarchal societal structure, the ashrama dharma model was prescribed for men only. Depending on their stage in life, women were expected first to obey their parents, then their husbands, and then their sons. When we look at dharma or code of conduct within this framework, there is no behavior, value, food, time, soil. There's no unit of any of these things that is moral or good for all persons. The person is never isolated or separated from their context. And as the Sri Lankan American anthropologist Valentine Daniel puts it, for a person in India, life is about a constant search for compatibility and for equilibrium within one's context. It is not that everyone who follows Hindu dharma also goes by these stages, but the idea persists. So, for instance, the emphasis on discipline among the parents in my study could be seen as a way to inculcate one of the central rules of the stage of brahmacharya. And the intense involvement of the parents in my research in the activities of day-to-day life, whether it was working for a living or taking the children to the temple or to various classes or doing all the work that is required to run a household, these parents could be said to be in the grihastha phase. So the self is viewed very differently depending on the stage of life that one is in. But this type of view is not considered in research on personality or in research on self-concept within psychology. In addition, within Hindu philosophies, the metaphysical self or the Atman is defined as the real or the true self. So the Bhagavad Gita describes it in chapter 2 as something that cannot be born, that cannot be destroyed, cannot be modified, cannot be killed, cannot be known, cannot die. It is eternal. And now the word soul is often used to translate Atman for a Western audience, but the word soul is not a good translation for it, because while the soul goes to heaven or hell after death, Atman goes through repeated life cycles, becoming more and more enlightened with each cycle, and ultimately becomes one with the divine or with the supreme being. So in his famous text, the principal Upanishads, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, he points to the Mandukya Upanishad, and he refers, in which he talks about the 4 states of consciousness that are mentioned. wakeful, dream, deep sleep, and something called the fourth state. The fourth state is then described in the Brihadaranyaka as blissful and indescribable in its intensity of joy. People reach this fourth stage through deep contemplation, and it is this fourth stage that reveals the true self that is unchanging, the Atman. So in the context of all this, performing one's dharma becomes especially important as a way to realize that the true self is the Atman, and working systematically towards deeper spiritual understanding becomes extremely important. At the same time, as spirituality is given so much importance, even the oldest Indian texts give great importance to the care of the physical self, whether we refer to Ayurveda or yoga or any of these other systems. We could say that these things do not apply to immigrant Indians who follow Hindu Dharma. But from my own research, from my own observations, and from anecdotal evidence based on conversations with Indian immigrants in different parts of North America, what I would suggest is that although changes are experienced due to immigration, the broad phases of the developmental stages of ashrama dharma are still evident, as is the search for the real self or the Atman. We have all these philosophical and religious organizations in various parts of North America that have committed themselves to assisting immigrants with these sorts of searches and within these journeys. Very little of the research within mainstream general Western psychology looks at these very interesting ways of thinking about the self and at these very different ways of conceptualizing life and the life cycle. Western frameworks of psychology are indigenous to the West. That is, they reflect the history, concepts, and ways of thinking of Americans and of Europeans. Adopting Western psychology wholesale places us at risk for several problems, including misunderstanding or misrepresenting our own Indian concepts because we have force-fitted them into Western concepts, and permitting our rich traditions and bodies of knowledge to be treated as irrational, primitive, non-acceptable, or even exotic. These dangers have been recognized, and some psychologists in India and in the West, as well as organizations, have been working to develop some sort of an indigenous Indian psychology, the inclusion of unique, deeply cultural and religious philosophical Hindu concepts like Sanskaar, Guru, Shishya, Karma, Dharma, Dukkha, Papa, Satya, Sarvodaya, Swadharma, Buddhi. These concepts have the potential to make psychology more relevant and effective for Indian society and for the people who follow Hindu Dharma in the Indian diaspora. Such a solid base would not only diversify the field of psychology itself, but would also inform us about the unique psychology of Indians, of Hindus, and the developmental journeys of people across the lifespan, both in India and in the diaspora. Thank you.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah. Thank you so much, Srimati Hemaji, for this wonderful, informative speech on Sanatana Dharma and psychology. We know Dharma in Hinduism is the spiritual law that directs us to the path of truth, morality, obligation. And your research on the comparison of Western and Indian societies indeed brought about some of the aspects of Hinduism that Indian parents need to follow, particularly your contrasting view on independence, the conceptualization of Samskaara, etc. I'm sure there is a lot of takeaways for the parents, today's parents, in bringing up their child towards Sanatana Dharma for values. Thank you so much. There are a couple of questions on the chat line, and I'll just read it out. The first question is, have you observed any unusual rebellion in Indian children for their parents' approach?
So the children the parents who I studied, who I did my research with, their children were mostly young. They were at the ages of about 7 or 8. So they were still quite young. They were not really rebelling at that point. But some of these children had older siblings who were in their teens. And I observed during my research some of the children complaining about the various activities, the religious and cultural activities that the parents arranged for them during the weekend. But this was not a frequent observation. This happened maybe 1 or 2 times. And the parents said that this was mostly because their children were being lazy and not because they were against doing these activities per se. So that was that was based on my own research. But as a person who studies parenting and as someone who's been sort of just observing this going on around me, one thing that I have noticed is that whether or not there will be rebellion and whether that rebellion will be open or passive aggressive really depends on where these children are being raised. So, for example, I noticed that the rebellion took a very different form, say, in a place like Indiana, where I lived for many years. The population of Indians there is comparatively quite low. And society, the community is very culturally and religiously homogeneous. And in those cases, these children, when they start going to high school, for instance, middle school and high school, they start experiencing a lot of peer pressure to give up aspects of their religious and cultural identity. So some of them start living, some of them decide to completely assimilate and become part of the mainstream Western society. They give up what they're being taught at home. And other children begin to live a sort of a split life where they are following the rules at home, but then they're becoming completely quote unquote American in school and in society. So those differences are seen. And some of these children during their teenage years did rebel. And this, I'm not basing it on my own research. Rather, I'm basing it on research done by other scholars who have studied teenagers and young adult immigrant children in the diaspora, as well as my observations. So there are young people who do end up rebelling. And in some cases, that means that they turn completely away from the cultural and religious background that their parents are trying to bring them up in. And in other cases, they come back after a period of time. And this often happens when young people, they may have given it all up and then they get married or they have children. And all of a sudden, their cultural and their religious background takes on a significance that it did not have when they were teenagers and when they were just trying to fit into their social environments.
Yeah. In fact, that was kind of a follow-up question that you already answered now. The question was that the child at an young age might, out of love towards children or towards parents, or because they don't have a thinking capacity of their own, they might follow, but because of peer pressure, they might rebel at an older age when they have some thinking capacity and they question our values. Did you come across any of that instances?
So in my own study, again, the children were quite young.
Right.
So they were really eager for the most part to follow what the parents were telling them to do. So there was one young girl, I remember, she was about 6 or 7 years old. And I remember very clearly her sitting in front of the Swaminarayan, the altar at her house.
Yeah.
And she was showing off for me because I was just there chatting with her mother and she was trying to show off. And what she did was she lighted the lamp with her mother's help. And then she did an arati and she sang Jana Gana Mana. So, so she was very eager to show that she knew and that she belonged to this group. So at that time, it's true that they don't have that critical thinking ability to really question what the parents are saying or, what they're asking them to do. And there is no doubt, there's a lot of research that shows that later on, during the teenage years, actually, the questioning does start.
Right.
And that the parents experience a great deal of pressure because they are also, they are not just bringing up their child in a vacuum. They are in the GTA, you have many children, for many Indians around you, but in many parts of North America, parents don't. Indian Hindu parents don't have other Indians around them. In those cases, the pressure is really, really strong. And the children do rebel. They do try to assimilate, they do try to become completely westernized. They reject the inputs from the parents and so on. And what I noticed was that, from much of the research tells us that some of the parents really dig in. They really say, no, this is the way to do it. And you have to do it this way. And when you are a full adult, you can make your own choices and move on. And as long as you stay here, you should stay here. And in fact, I had one of the mothers said very clearly to me that when they will rebel in the future, I will plant my feet on rock, is the way she put it. So she said she would dig in. She was going to insist. And there were other parents who said that, they would probably let their children make their choices with the hope that the foundations that they have laid for their children will, become reactivated later in life when their children begin to think about their parents and their origins and their heritage, and when the responsibility comes upon them to raise their own children. At that point, they will read. So that was a hope that many of the parents expressed.
Would the results differ based on the age of the child? For example, some parents of younger children might focus on Dinacharyaa and other Samskaaras and values, whereas parents of an older children would focus on independence.
Yeah, no, at least in my research, all the parents were very concerned about the daily routine. Now, that Dinacharya was really, really important for them throughout. But of course, by the time the children were older, the children were putting themselves through the routine themselves without being reminded by the parents. So initially, the parents really worked at putting down the foundation of Dinacharya. And then later on, the focus shifted to other things like performance in school and the learning of music or dance, or those, or participating in competitions and in scholarly exams to win something, or those sorts of things. So they began. So the focus does shift depending on the age of the child. Yes.
I think I have only that much questions. I will now request our chairman, Dr. Lakshmanan, to say a few words. And thank you so much, Hema ji. This was very, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Namaskaram, Professor Hema Ganapathy. I find it so good to hear from you. I'm glad that I met you at another institution, great institution, spreading our values and Dharma. And I'm glad that now on the Sringeri platform, you have shared your knowledge, you are giving your experience with members of the community. And Hemaji, I want to share some thoughts with you and our audience. 2 days back in a function, I was with Mr. Dennis Mills. Dennis Mills was the chief of staff of our former Prime Minister, P.L.A. Trudeau. And Dennis Mills was involved in drafting the great immigration rules for Canada when Prime Minister Trudeau in 1971 opened the gates of Canada for people like us, people from different parts of the world, to come and join this great community we call Canada today, community of communities. Today I share, and Trudeau at that time said he wants Canada to enrich with values and rich experience of other people to come and share with the citizens of Canada. Today, when you give your lecture on thoughts sharing, the dawn, the Sattvic dawn that you are doing, sharing your knowledge with the community members here, Hema, I feel how wonderful what Pierre Elliott Trudeau said 50 years back, that opened the door for people like you and I to come and be part of this great society we call Canada and share our knowledge and give the art of giving your knowledge, sharing your thoughts with the community. I want to thank you, Hema, for sharing, for giving this wonderful lecture. You covered right from Upanishads to Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, all the knowledge and wisdom, and you brought all that, how to bring up a child in Grihasthasrama, giving our values to all the becoming the various stages in life. I request you, Hema, to come and share, give more lectures and share you give the nectar of all your research values and you are sharing. You did all the labor, collecting all the information, talking to the families, observing the experience. And today when Ravi was asking the question, you gave the response so clearly, so clearly, and we all benefit with your experience. Hema, it's really wonderful that I met you at another temple, and today the journey started, and together we are helping our community. Thank you very much, Hema, for coming and giving the lecture. We would like you to come and give more lectures and share your thoughts with our community members. I want to say thanks to all our volunteers, and of course, Dr. Alakananda and Dr. Parambat for starting this program. Thank you very much to you all. Let us meet again in the next lecture. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Doctor. That concludes today's Jnana Sudha. And for more information, please go through our website for further episodes of this Jnana Sudha. Thank you and have a great day.